Omer bin Ahsan, I'm the CEO of Hubble. We are a B2B supply chain payments and financing fintech trying to digitize the large value chain in the corporate sector. I think in the last at least 10 or 15 years, we've solved the problem of supply side. So the infrastructure, the technology, the banking regulations, the digital regulations, all of those ingredients are there to support a robust digital payment infrastructure that scales across Pakistan. And demand has also, if you look at the numbers, it's been rising year over year. The core issue still remains that there are certain cultural nuances and certain policy incentive structures that inhibit the growth of digital payments in Pakistan. And I'd like to focus on both. When we talk about cultural nuances, there's obviously the issue of literacy, access to banking, perception of what banking is or what digital payment is. That obviously is the biggest inhibitor. And then once you are banked, how relevant those use cases, that experiences towards that particular individual adopting it or a merchant adopting it. The second part are the policy initiatives that the regulator has already taken, but its policy is still theoretical. It's an abstraction. The operationalization of these policies is where we remain inconsistent, and we take one step forward and then we go two steps backward. This is where perhaps there needs to be a more concentrated effort in making sure that the key state pillars, such as the tax authorities, the banking regulator, the SECP, the Federated Identity, which is NADRA, all of those agencies are well aligned into a national payment strategy. I think we've focused on a lot of collateral development, research, return on investments for the large corporations. As a business, that's been our job. That's how we sell the product that we've developed for them. And the key ingredients in making sure that they understand the value of digital payments is, of course, the increase or the increase in velocity in terms of cash flows, liquidity, access to capital. They lose out a lot of treasury income because of an ineffective or inefficient banking system, especially the check clearing process, which is almost 98% of all payments in the B2B segment. So when you make them focus on these aspects, where instant settlements or instant payments and getting a notification digitally on an irrevocable debit instruction, which helps them make some key decisions in terms of supply chain. They can release the goods, they can knock off the invoices. That adds into the efficiency that a CFO or a treasurer or a financial controller or a head of sales in all of these large corporations are looking for. So it's been easy for us to have these conversations. These are, of course, some of the smartest people in Pakistan in terms of their educational background and finance and accounting or marketing and sales. So they appreciate how digital efficiency improves their businesses, increases velocity, improves their liquidity, and then drives their focus away from collecting and reconciling towards actual business and how can they focus on growth. So I'll try to cover that education into three parts. There are two inhibitors. One is, of course, tax transparency and the price of transaction. And the way that those two aspects are covered in a B2B transaction is that taxation is already priced in. The way our tax structure works is that if you are not declaring income tax to the tax authorities, there is an additional sales tax or an additional withholding tax that you pay upfront. And most of this segment, MSME segment in the distribution or the supply side, have priced that into their value chain. So this is no longer a deterrent towards driving digital adoption or being more transparent because they've adopted digital payments. The second aspect is that a lot of these corporations have taken the price of digital transaction, which means that it's the MSME does not have to pay for it. So what really remains is our responsibility to educate them on usage, on the risks and how to prevent frauds, and also the efficiency that it produces for them, for these people themselves. I'll give you an example. One of the dealers that uses our platform lives in a remote town in Appatabad, where he has to drive for about 1 hour to the nearest branch to make a payment so that he can procure from his supplier. So for similar businesses across Pakistan, and this is being used across 200 cities, this is a great value that it saves them the cost of fuel. They can make an instant decision to buy more supplies if they have to supply it in that locality. This is a tourist hotspot as well, but it doesn't have a bank branch. So he's in constant need of construction materials that he has to supply within the locality. So these are the use cases that we've enabled across B2B value chains. And it comes out of the convenience that it provides, because we've already addressed the problem of taxation. It's priced in, and the cost of the transaction that the corporate is already bearing that price. So because of this unique spot that's been created, convincing these distributors has not been that of a challenge. But of course, it has to be supported with local presence and being able to train them and educate them and speak to them in their own language. So pricing is a tricky subject, because when you talk about segmentation, or when you talk about floors and ceilings, uh, then the regulator has a role to play, and then there are both sides to the argument of whether the regulator should control prices or they should not control prices, and that's a classic economics and free market sort of a debate that opens up. But particularly for countries like Pakistan, where adoption is still a challenge, price segmentation should come out of the market forces themselves, that they should price categories themselves before the regulator steps in. The regulator steps in to fill gaps where the market does not, where the market is not converging. The recent pricing issue around fuel pumps is a good example of that happening. That the dealer margins for fuel pumps is just not enough to bear the cost of POS acquiring. So this is why segmentation, and not just in fuel categories, there are subcategories within the fast consumer good industry, such as pharmaceutical has better margins, but other food items such as confectionaries have very low margins. So all of these segments might require certain innovation in terms of pricing, diversification in terms of not just a percentage-based model or maybe a tier flat-based model. So these are some of the instruments that the banks and the fintech providers need to utilize, because otherwise they will not be able to scale in certain segments. Which is why you see that most of the POS acquiring businesses now concentrated into the major cities and into high-end retail or into fashion and retail. So this is because it's priced right for those industries, but it's not priced right for the other industries. So I think the promise is huge, and I feel that once RAST is commercially available to licensed and non-licensed entities, this will allow us to do a great reset in terms of pricing and in terms of how transactions are settled, in terms of access to the banking network. But the once we start operating it, I think there are certain aspects that cannot be ignored. RAST, being the core infrastructure held by the central bank, will still need distribution partners, and those distribution partners, other than banks or banks themselves, will still have costs associated to distributing that, and that cost will still have to be priced in. Now, maybe the regulated entities will be asked to minimize that cost so that it's not passed on to the consumer, but the non-regulated entities who are by design required to charge those transactions because that's their business model, I think that's where you will see that there is pricing around that. And I think central bank has been quite open about the fact that it will be priced at some stage. Right now, for a certain segment of the population, which everyone agrees, to get them into the financial circle, it's important that you make it free. But beyond that, for wider use cases and when it's distributed through non-banking partners, there will be pricing around that. And that is why I call it a great reset, where new pricing structures have to be enabled, where tiered approaches can be taken, where you could also look at how payment with the context that it allows, because Rust, the format of Rust allows a better flow of information as well, can be instrumentalized in a way that you just don't make money out of payment streams, but you can make money out of the contextual information that you move through it. I think that from an investment point of view, from looking at the asymmetry of our socio-political economic environment in the country, it's important that all the fintech investors or payment investors are not relying, or the founders are not relying entirely on just the payment throughput to give them revenue, because for that, for them to reach that inflection point where they are cash flow positive is going to take a really long time, especially in the consumer space, which is already overcrowded. There are too many banks solving that problem, and then there are too many fintechs solving that problem, because everyone's attracted to the large population base in this country. So because of the fact that it'll be too crowded, pricing will remain low, and with RAS, once the Great Reset happens, it will become lower. As a result, to rely on those payment streams for a revenue model would not be a smart thing to do. Which is why, at this point in time, when RAST enables the flow of non-payment data, the contextual data that moves with it, it's very important that there is serious thought given that this movement of data is standardized, and that this data is then accessible to the sender and the receiver with the right consent controls. And once it's available, of course, these organizations will then be able to monetize the flow of this data, because the data is absolutely valuable. It reveals key insights into consumer or business behavior that can then lead to other monetized use cases, such as financing. I think this whole population youth bulge and the demographic dividend uh, uh, asset that we are all talking about, uh, it cannot be leveraged if we're not able to document and digitize the economy in totality. Which means that anyone now being part of the economic life cycle once they graduate, or whatever form of education they've received, that they are part of the financial circle, which is important, because creating that culture straight from the beginning, in terms of that you have to have a transparent relationship with your tax authorities, that you have to have be part of the financial circle, so that so that you can benefit from the state, and provide the returns to the state for whatever economic benefits that you've received. Once we're able to crack that nut, only then we can draw from that demographic dividend, because otherwise a non-excluded large population is not really going to serve the economy in any positive way. In fact, it's going to exacerbate the problem of cash in circulation, which in turn leads to other vices, such as smuggling and drug trade, and terrorism, and all of the other associated, and parking of wealth, and the Benami transactions. It just leads into other problems that we've been facing for the last 75 years. So this is perhaps the biggest economic imperative. I would say that this is the quickest means towards economic sovereignty, that if we are able to untap this population base, or the new people that are coming into the economic cycle, that if they are digitally and financially included, so that they are taxed appropriately, and that they are able to contribute to the financial ecosystem, this will unlock resources for the state, and of course those resources then get pushed into infrastructure and growth for the country itself. See, we have to look at within the region. I think within Southeast Asia, South Asia, some countries in North Africa, East Africa, there are a lot of similar economies. Even some countries in Latin America, there are a lot of countries that we look at, within the same space of GDP, population, the heterogeneous population, different languages, all of the complexities that a country like Pakistan has, or being condemned to a geography where you're always exposed to being caught in the middle of a strategic fight. I think with that kind of setting, it is important that a strong state action will help us get to that digital future. Private sector can converge on a lot of things, but obviously because of their own targets, their own yearly targets or quarterly targets, and then their own competitive sort of streak, it's very hard for them to cohesively work together on a lot of things, which is why the state has to consistently intervene and fill these spaces. But the state cannot intervene inconsistently. They have to have a national payment strategy that the entire state infrastructure converges towards, including the corporate sector, including the private sector, the financial sector, and then make sure that that program is followed through for the next 3 to 5 years to reach to that point. So at this point in time, if you look at other economies where this was successful, it was backed up by a strong central push, which is the quickest way to get something done in a country that's complex and as asymmetric as Pakistan. I agree, especially post 18th Amendment, it's just become even more complicated to get everyone to sit on the same table. But it's important that a federal backed payment strategy followed by a federal backed payment council that includes the best experts in the industry that can drive this conversation from the financial sector, corporate sector, fintech sector, tax authorities, SECP, State Bank, all of them converge. It's not that this attempt has not been made yet. There is still a forum, but as it is with everything else in this country, that we come up with great infrastructure, come up with good policies as well, but when we have to follow through on those policies, we sort of give up too soon or change directions in the middle of the way. That just really needed to be followed through. So I would imagine creation of a national payment strategy, if not a directorate, but a very high-powered committee that should be managed at the highest level. And if we've seen this happen before, we've seen strategic economic interests given high priority by all the key stakeholders in the state machinery. If you look at a close example of what's happened with the national single window, the Pakistan single window, which is about 19 government agencies coming together to streamline a digitized trade customs clearance process, which is very complex and broken, but they've put it all in one box under one ministry. So it's possible, it's doable. We've done it so many times before, but payment has to be given a national priority in a way that it should be considered as a key to economic sovereignty. I think it's an inevitability. This is what, in a philosophical way, we can call the march of the spirit. We have to go forward towards not the documentation of the economy, but the digitization of the economy. And that includes the digitization of invoices, the securitization of inventory and assets, the digitization of payments, digitization of SME, corporates, retail. The entire value chain has to be digitized, and it begins with the citizen's relationship with the retailer and the citizen's relationship with the government. Those two are the key nodes that have to be digitized, and I feel that there is now a decent amount of policy action and conversations in almost every key state machinery. If you look at the provincial tax authorities, the federal tax authorities, SECP, FPR, State Bank, everyone's focused on the subject. They're talking about it. You might not agree with the pace, you might not agree with their measures, but the conversation, the narrative now exists at the highest level, which is a very good first sign. Now, what really needs to happen is the right framework and the ability to provide governance and following through on that framework. That needs to be in place at the highest level. And once that is done, you will feel that it will accelerate. The adoption will accelerate and open up the doors for new investments, open up the door for a highly transformed knowledge economy. But let's say if those policy infrastructure or that framework does not exist, it will still happen, but it will happen the way it's happening right now. We're still seeing year on year growth. If you talk to every fintech founder or any bank, he will tell you that the digital numbers are rising. Now, they should be rising at a faster pace. That requires policy ingredients, but it will continue to happen because that is the march of the spirit. As the younger population rises up into decision making, and the consumer goes towards a more postmodern tech-enabled life, these things will naturally pick up because they're part of their culture growing up.